So now it's my pleasure to introduce a special guest with us today, 4th District Congressman Dan Newhouse. Dan has been, I think, certainly a very strong supporter of the Tri-Cities. Congressman Newhouse has been a very strong supporter of the Tri-Cities in a variety of different ways, and certainly. Oh, okay, so we're gonna change this up. Since you've all quieted down now, I've got the crowd quiet. We're going to have Peggy McCullough come up, our prime sponsor, our premier sponsor for the day, and introduce Congressman Newhouse. That'll make you feel better, Dan, anyway. Because Peggy, come on up. So I'd like to introduce Peggy McCullough. Peggy's the General Manager for Bechtel National at the Waste Treatment Plant here, and Bechtel is the premier sponsor for this event. So welcome, Peggy. Thanks, Peggy. You have everything you need.
Thank you, Carl. Good afternoon. We're delighted to sponsor today's luncheon, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to address such an important group of community leaders, our small business owners and entrepreneurs. Now, many of you may know Bechtel, but for those of you that don't, we've been part of the Tri-Cities for more than 40 years. We built the Columbia Generating Station and the Fast Flux Test Facility. We've also built some of the world's largest and most complex structures, things that are truly first of a kind, which required innovative approaches to accomplish those. The English Channel Tunnel Rail Link, the stabilization and new safe confinement of the destroyed reactor at Chernobyl, space launch complexes at Vandenberg and Cape Canaveral, the world's largest solar thermal facility in California, as well as a number of chemical weapons demilitarization plants. So here today in the Tri-Cities, we're building a first-of-a-kind vitrification facility, one that will transform the nuclear waste that sits at the tank farms into a solid vitrified form to protect this community. Now, in all of our projects, small businesses are an important partner in our success. So without small business, we couldn't be accomplishing the waste treatment plant. It's especially true here in the Tri-Cities, where we've purchased more than $1.2 billion worth of goods and services over the past 15 years of the VIT plant. In fact, today, where I just came from, we're holding a supplier collaboration event for all of our suppliers and subcontractors at the waste treatment plant. While we are a large company, we too have to innovate. We have to be entrepreneurs. And there's a trend in big business today on entrepreneurship. So the question is, how does a large company build an entrepreneurial spirit inside that company to stay competitive? So at Bechtel, one of the ways we do that is we look to our employees for ideas about innovation. And we look to the needs of the marketplace. So for example, we have a smart city sensor network initiative that we're using in the UK, where we put sensor networks on trains so that they can self-regulate the distance between the trains to maximize capacity and increase safety. Internal to the company, we encourage our employees to propose new ideas that can improve efficiency, be more environmentally sustainable, and improve results for our customers. And we do that through something we've dubbed the Future Fund. So employees bring forward ideas, those are vetted, and we decide whether we will fund the implementation of those ideas through the Future Fund. And I'm actually proud to say that the Bechtel employees here at WTP have submitted more ideas to the Future Fund than any other project worldwide in Bechtel. So I would give them a hand for that. And in fact, some of those innovative thinkers are here today at the table here in front. Their ideas are improving safety and efficiencies at the VIT plant. So, for example, we're improving safety of our workers by using 360-degree cameras. This is an interesting microphone situation. Just warning you all when you get up here. To inspect confined spaces, so that rather than sending an individual into a confined space, we can send in a 360 camera to do that inspection. We're using virtual and augmented reality tools at the construction site, so tough books out in the field so that people can actually pull up a drawing on the spot to take a look at insulation as opposed to having to go back to the trailer and pull a hard copy drawing. I have to say that local, state, and federal governments have a big role in the success of big businesses and small businesses. And we rely on them to help create an atmosphere that reduces barriers so new ideas can flourish. And I believe that we're extremely lucky in the state of Washington and here in the Tri-Cities to have elected officials who work very hard to understand our unique circumstances, our challenges, and they collaborate for the benefit of the businesses and the community in the region. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce Congressman Dan Newhouse. Dan is a strong supporter of the Tri-Cities. I can tell you that I personally have been so impressed with the effort he's made to understand the issues at Hanford, to reach out to the community leaders and get input so that he has a better understanding of the challenges here. Dan and his family, they operate a 600-acre farm in Sunnyside, which has been a multi-generational business, which I'm sure has also seen many innovations over the years and has required some entrepreneurship. So please join me in welcoming Dan Newhouse.
You can't see, or can you? Can you see that from here? We're picking hops at home, and this is a hop tie, so I thought it was appropriate to wear. And we do have some innovation on our farm over the years. Probably need some more, but always looking at ways to improve. This is an exciting topic of conversation today. You know, one of the things that is a lot of times people talk about in the Tri-Cities is the future of the area after the Hanford cleanup is done. And that may be a few years into the future when that actually happens, but we have some very innovative, insightful people that can look into the future to plan for that inevitability. And so I think we have a really bright future, and entrepreneurship is a big part of that. So this is a tremendously important topic. And so I'm glad that this is what's being discussed today, and I think we've got some great panelists to talk about it. My job today is to introduce one of them. And I decided not to just read boring, but a list of accomplishments where she went to school and everything, because you can read that yourself. I wanted to introduce Congresswoman Suzan Bene because she's a great friend of mine. She really is. We've served together in Congress now for almost 3 years. She got there a little bit before me. But prior to that, we served together in Governor Gregoire's cabinet. She was Director of Revenue, I was Director of Agriculture, and so we got to work together on a lot of things. She was right up the street from me. But she's become a really good friend. In fact, I tease her that she's my favorite Democrat. Of course, I say that to a lot of people, right? Yeah, sorry. Now, sometimes you may be surprised that one congressperson is so welcoming to another in their district, and it's kind of a strange thing. You know, there's a protocol that you have to follow. If you're going to go into someone else's district, you're supposed, I don't know if it's written anywhere, but you're supposed to let the other congressperson know, just so that, you know, there's no mystery about what's going on in your district. Well, I have no compunction whatsoever about having Suzan here in the Tri-Cities today. In fact, I honestly welcome her presence. I think we have a tremendous story to tell here. I think we have a lot of things to be proud of. And we also have a lot of things that people need to understand that are pretty unique to Central Washington. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome Suzan here. She joins a long, distinguished list, actually, of people that have actually accepted my invitation to come. Derek Kilmer's been here, Denny Heck has been here, Greg Walden has been here from Oregon. Just recently we had the Secretary of Energy, Rick Perry, here. You know, so this is something that I'm very glad that people want to come, show an interest in what's happening in the Tri-Cities, want to understand some of the challenges that we face and some of the things that we need to be successful on into the future. Suzan is particularly a well-qualified individual to be sitting on this panel. She's an entrepreneur herself. I think, I don't even know all the details about this, but helped start an internet company, was a CEO of a high-tech firm, worked at Microsoft, just saying that, worked at Microsoft. That, that gives you street cred in a lot of areas for about a dozen years, right? So she knows a lot about this particular subject, certainly brings a lot to the table, and so I'm interested to hear what she has to say, as well as the other two gentlemen that we have with us today. We have, like I said, a lot going on in tourism, and agriculture, and high tech, and distribution, all kinds of different things happening in the Tri-Cities. We have a bright future if we all figure out how to recognize that and encourage it, how we in the government can help foster that. And so some of those questions hopefully will be addressed today. I'm pleased to be here with you, but I'm particularly pleased to be able to share this little part of the 4th Congressional District with my colleague from the west side, and we ordered this rain just for you today, so you feel at home and comfortable with your umbrella. But Suzan Bene, my colleague from Congress, welcome to the Tri-Cities. Let's give her a round of applause for being here with us.
I'm going to start with Congresswoman Bene, and I'll kind of fill in some of the things that Dan talked about a little bit, but she represents the 1st District in Washington, and that's an area that's, I think, the southernmost boundary is about Kirkland. She has Woodinville, so she has a lot of our wineries in her district, and that goes clear north to the Canadian border, so as most of these districts are, there's a lot of geography to cover. She was sworn into the House of Representatives in 2012, and as Dan said, she really brings a unique voice with her experience as a successful technology entrepreneur and business leader. Suzan currently serves on the House Ways and Means Committee, the House Budget Committee. She serves as vice chair of the new Democrat coalition and is co-chair of the Women's High Tech Caucus. She's on the Congressional Caucus for Virtual, Augmented, and Mixed Reality Technologies. She's on the Internet of Things Caucus, and then she's on the Dairy Caucus and the Aluminum Caucus. And I'm not sure how those two fit with the rest of it, but obviously it does. As an executive and entrepreneur, she helped to start drugstore.com as its vice president of marketing and store development, and served as the CEO, as Dan mentioned, of Nimble Technology, a business software company that was based on University of Washington technology. Suzan also spent 12 years at Microsoft, as Dan mentioned, as vice president of the company's mobile communications business. And again, as Dan mentioned, before she was elected, she served in Governor Gregoire's cabinet. So I think everybody's got to agree that with her mix of real-world experience in both private and public sectors, she has a really unique understanding of how to build businesses, create jobs, and adopt policies that provide individuals with access and opportunity. So I think we're very pleased to have you here today. Next is Dr. Lee Cheatham. Lee was named Director of Technology Deployment and Outreach at PNNL just earlier this month, right? Yeah, 2 weeks ago. So he told me he was able to find his way back to his desk already. Lee most recently was at Brookhaven National Lab, where he launched and led the Office of Strategic Partnerships. Lee also oversaw Brookhaven's technology commercialization and economic development functions. Prior to joining Brookhaven, Lee served as CEO and general manager of the commercialization, manager of commercialization for a 500-person biodesign institute at Arizona State University. And from 1998 to 2010, Lee served as the executive director of the Washington Technology Center. So it's really nice to have him in the Tri-Cities, but back in Washington, so welcome, Lee. And then last but not least, Ron Boninger. Ron is currently an investor and, as I mentioned earlier, is serving as CEO of Carbitex, but he's also been very instrumental in Fuse, which is a local co-working space. I think that's why he got the answer to the question right. I would have been concerned if you didn't get it right, Ron. And he's the owner and founder of Stillmore LLC. Stillmore is a startup, a small business management and investment company that's focused on community improvement through small business economic success. Previously, Ron was a co-owner and founder of Three River Holdings LLC that was in Phoenix. Three Rivers was bought by Ty Light in 2010. Ron moved to the community in 2011 and became executive vice president for global sales. And then, as many of you know, Ty Light was purchased by Permobile and is a leading wheelchair manufacturer. So that gave Ron time to get involved in some other things. I know Ron's passion and expertise is for entrepreneurship, small business growth, finance, and capital formation. So I think Ron has a particular interest in this subject, and we're glad to have him here. So with that, I'm going to let each panelist just make a few general comments, very brief general comments, and then we've got some prepared questions, but you're going to use Slido to ask questions of the panelists, and we'd like to get questions from the audience as opposed to using our prepared questions. So with that, Congresswoman, do you want to start, please?
Sure. Good afternoon. It's great to be here in Dan's district, and thanks for letting me come across the boundary, across the mountains. Actually, our districts are right next door to each other, right by the Canadian border, and so it kind of shows you how big the districts are, especially from here up to the border and between Okanagan and Whatcom County, right around there where our districts meet. So I have a lot of dairy in my district, hence the Dairy Caucus, and we were both, Dan and I served on the Agriculture Committee last Congress, and so a lot of agriculture in my district, more specialty crops, fruits and vegetables on the western side of the mountains. And a aluminum smelter and a couple oil refineries in terms of you're asking about the aluminum caucus. But I think actually the diversity of my district, from being the home of Microsoft and a lot of technology and biomedical devices and biotechnology and global health, all the way through agriculture and advanced manufacturing. When we talk about entrepreneurship and innovation, I think sometimes we talk about it in a narrow way. We talk about software and kind of new high technologies, and we forget the incredible innovation that's happening in so many sectors, in healthcare, and incredible innovation happening in agriculture, and the impact that it has across all of our communities across our entire state. And so when we talk about this and the new ideas, one thing I'm very excited about, especially as technology has become much more horizontal, is that now we're seeing technology impacting different sectors, and how using technology we're seeing incredible change and innovation and huge opportunities. And I think that there is a way that we can be helpful in policy, and also a way that we can be hurtful in policy. And so that's why, as someone who's actually been kind of in the private sector for a long time coming in, I think it's a huge opportunity for us to be thoughtful about policy, be forward-looking about policy, so we can do a great job supporting innovation going forward.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you for having me here today, and it is very nice to be back in the Tri-Cities after, for those of you that I've known from past lives, it's very nice to be back. I think the top-line message that I'm wanting to put forward today is that entrepreneurship is one part of a very large and important ecosystem for whether it's economic development or scientific progress or anything else. And so understanding that entrepreneurs are a very special breed of people, the willingness to take risks, but there are a lot of other things around them. And so one of the perspectives, of course, being from Pacific Northwest National Labs, is those ideas come from somewhere. And I think you all here living in the Tri-Cities know about the laboratory, but let me just hit a couple of things so that you can see what the source of this is. You know, the laboratory is a very large organization in the sense that it's about $1 billion a year in activity. There are more than 4,000 people. It does basic research through energy research, national security, and a whole set of things like that. One of and the primary purpose, by the way, of the DOE National Laboratories is as stewards of our national scientific capability. But one of the important outcomes from places like Pacific Northwest National Labs is as a source of ideas for entrepreneurs to pick up, or to gather together and run through. And I think we take that seriously at the laboratory. We take it seriously in that one of the outcomes we're looking for is making sure that for whatever can be made out of the research that's in the laboratory and moved into the private sector so the commercial value is realized through entrepreneurs or through large companies or others, that's really an important part of it. And so the organization that I'm privileged to come in and lead is responsible for that activity in the laboratory. Just a couple of quick notes. There are some almost 200 companies around the U.S. that have PNNL technology in them. There are more than 70 of those companies that are here in the state of Washington. And so I think that speaks to both the national and the impact that we can see nationally, but also how important it is that that's done locally. The innovation ecosystem, as I like to call it, is very much a contact sport. And so getting all of you in the room engaged in that is really a critical part of what we try to do to help in our small piece of it. So with that, I'll stop and we'll take questions later.
Thanks, Lee. Ron.
So, can you hear me? My microphone on? Okay, great. So as you can see, I'm going to go off script here very quickly, and the reason I'm doing that is follow up on Lee. We'd like to take those 200 technology companies that exist and make it 400.
Right.
And we'll only do it by working together. And the same thing with Congresswoman and Bene is working together. We can do the tech transfer and create this overall entrepreneurship in this ecosystem. And our ecosystem that we've created here in the Tri-Cities had a hot off the press success today. And that is that with the leadership of the Port of Benton and with the Tri-City Research District underneath the Port of Benton, the Research District.
I think they want you to get a mic.
Oh.
That,
It's not working, huh?
Oh.
there you go. That's better.
Oh, it's okay. So the Research District partnered with Fuse, which is a business and community accelerator co-working space here in the Tri-Cities to apply for a federal grant called an I-6 Challenge Grant through the EDA. And we found out just a couple hours ago that we received that grant. It's a $300,000 grant to start a business accelerator here in the Tri-Cities. So we'll require matching funds from the private sector, but we've never before received a grant like that. So it's quite an accomplishment to do that. So I want to thank Scott Keller and all the commissioners at the Port for their leadership and support to enable the Tri-City Research District to work with Fuse. But more importantly, everyone in this room, the lab wrote a letter of support for this grant. Cities wrote letters of support for this grant. The Benton Franklin County of Governments wrote a letter of support. TRIDEC, the Regional Chamber of Commerce, all sorts of organizations across our entire region work together to have a catalyst in this ecosystem that we've never had before with this grant. So if everyone would give themselves a hand for this, it's really a great accomplishment I want to share with everyone. So now that I'm totally off script, I don't want to take up too much time. I did put together Business and Community Accelerator is what we're trying to put together. It's the effort that Fuse is leading, and it's really providing resources to businesses across the board to get started. Training and education, a location, a co-working space, and financial resources to be successful. I'm going to skip some of this. This is what Lee has mentioned a couple times, this ecosystem. And one of the things about the ecosystem, just like this grant, is it's all inclusive. It might be led by the private sector and entrepreneurs because they're the ones that are willing to take that extra risks to transfer technology from the lab, but it has to be inclusive of everyone in the room, and that's what that grant is that we just received. We like to keep metrics at Fuse of how the ecosystem is doing, and we had 84 companies that started and 421 jobs that were created. And one of the fun things about this, and this is from the Harvard Business Review, that for every high-tech job created, 6 other jobs are created. So it gives an opportunity for that other sector of entrepreneurs to create services. A dry cleaner down the road, those things are all part of what create our tax base. And it's very exciting. It's a great stat to show how economic prosperity can lead to the tax base, to lead to other things that can make a great community as well. There's a lot of programming involved with it. And then this is a very complicated slide, but it shows how we can all work together. It shows the grant writing in the middle. It shows this accelerator fund that I just talked about, that we're going to be working very closely with the lab, which we've already done. We've had many meetings with the lab to talk about how we can work together to transfer technology in a very useful and thoughtful way. In the work, I love this picture, but the work's just getting started. We have a great foundation to build upon in this community, and an opportunity to really create a hotbed for entrepreneurship. And so I thank TRIDEC for putting this panel together, because it's a great idea. Thank you.
Thanks to all our panelists. So I just want to point out, you're seeing something a little bit unusual today, and that is me using technology. So I thought it was only appropriate that I should try to do this since the panel is up here. But now we're going to start some questions, and I think it's kind of a free-for-all on and actually Slido is working now, so, but a free-for-all on who would like to answer these questions, and maybe more than one of you would. But let's take that second question first, and say how important or how likely is the pending federal tax reform effort to encourage business expansion and entrepreneurship?
I guess I get that one. So I actually think tax policy can have a big impact. It creates incentives. As someone who ran the Department of Revenue for the state, you are always surprised how we never get rid of anything, we just add things. And the federal tax code's kind of the same. So you might have put an incentive in for a certain type of industry or new technology that was being developed that is now mature and has been incredibly successful and doesn't need an incentive anymore, but it never goes away. And we're don't always have the resources to help support newer businesses and newer types of industries. And so tax policy can have a big impact. We can help make sure that it's easy for young businesses. Right now, I'd say we hear from many small businesses about how complicated our tax system is, the challenges they have just keeping up. They don't have attorneys and tax accountants on staff. So when you're a startup business and you're trying to go forward, especially in complicated areas where there might be a regulatory environment like energy or healthcare, how do you move forward? You have a great idea. How do you do that if you need to have a lot of employees who aren't necessarily working on the research or consultants, but are actually just trying to help you navigate the playing field? So tax policy has a big impact in one area there on making sure that we can make things simple, help innovative new businesses, and then generally have a system that works the way the world works today. A lot has changed. Last time we did major overhaul for the federal tax system was in 1986. A lot has happened since 1986. And a lot has happened in the way the world works. And so there are new things that we need to take into account. We have a lot of digital goods and e-commerce and different ways that our economy works. So these are all things that need to be addressed because a lot of newer business and innovation are capturing these ideas and moving forward. So we need to be better stewards of policy. We need to keep policy up to date. And our tax system was one good example of that. But the last thing I'll say is the further out of date something is, especially something like tax, the more complicated it is to get it up to date, and that also makes it a lot more challenging. And that's what we kind of face as we walk into this really right away as we go back into session next week.
Ron, I'm going to put you on the spot and say, because you've started businesses, what are the things you'd like to see? And remind you got 2 members of Congress here. This is a pretty rare event.
You're going to put me on the spot. I think you said well. I think that one of the things when businesses get started is that the biggest thing they're focusing on is their product and what they really need to do. And sometimes it's very, very difficult to focus on tax issues and regulatory issues when we're in those early stages. So all of a sudden you get to a certain success point, and you realize you have to do these things. And it can be very difficult if those things, you only have a limited amount of resources to start a business, you know. And as Carl said, you're taking risk, abnormal risk, to organize and start that business. When those limited resources, if a lot of it has to go to understanding the tax code or understanding regulatory things that might be old, might be outdated, those resources aren't going to creating the product or creating the service or the new ag technology, whatever it might be out there. So the things that can be done to facilitate business from that standpoint are really helpful. And of course, you know, as an example of it, but the things that the SBA does, the items that can be supportive to the business from a government standpoint that makes sense are, you know, incredibly helpful. My business that I started in Phoenix got over $4 million in grants from NIH, National Institute of Health, through an SBIR program. And those types of programs are incredibly helpful to business, and it's a way that the government program can really be supportive to allow these businesses to be successful. So it's really both sides.
So I'm going to jump to that third question there, which I think is an audience question, but what should the role of government, and it's not necessarily federal government, but government and taxpayer-funded resources be in entrepreneurship? Anybody could jump on that?
There are a few things that we do now, I guess I'll say, rather than what should the role be, you know, what is it now and what part is important about that? Ron mentioned one, certainly the SBIR program, but there are a whole set of programs, especially at the federal level, that support the development of entrepreneurs. The I-6 program that you're talking about, there's a version of it in EDA. I think there's a version of it in NSF that does, or something similar in NSF. The support for programs from the major agencies, NIH, Department of Energy, Department of Defense. Many of those have a lot of resources that are directed at supporting the growth of small companies, and in that process, helping entrepreneurs, especially new entrepreneurs, learn how they can be better at it. What are the issues that support? At one other level, I'll just make one other comment. There are more at a local level, a whole set of resources that are funded through state and local governments that I think provide the similar sort of resources to entrepreneurs, to small business owners, that sort of thing, that turn out to be very valuable. From our perspective, of course, at the laboratory, what we're looking for is that very large, we believe, and very important federal investment into the science base of the country becomes a platform from which all of those people that you've just talked about now can operate. And so our role is to certainly help to do that and make that match and support people that want to reach in and start, especially in our case, technology-based companies, or technology into companies where technology is important. Many of that's agriculture and food processing too.
And I just want to reiterate, the investment we make in basic research makes such a huge difference and has had such a huge impact for decades. And so many of our innovations, and we looked through and backtracked, we'd probably find a place where basic research had an impact in terms of unlocking something. The internet is probably a great example. Many cases in healthcare across the board, whether it was NIH or NSF or Department of Energy or so many other Department of Defense investments in basic research that really led or kind of unlocked something that allowed there to be an innovation that might have turned into a private business and a large commercial company. And sometimes we don't give basic research the credit it deserves. And I worry a lot about making sure that we can have consistent funding for basic research. That's where I started my career. I was a bio major, and I did biomedical research out of school. And those great breakthroughs are things that we invested in many times yesterday that we're seeing come to fruition today. And we've been good at being long-term thinkers to make sure we kept making those investments. It's not something you can turn on and off. Like a spigot. Research doesn't work that way. And so when we look at budgeting and things that happen in Washington, D.C., which tend to be short-term focused, we need to remember how critical it is that we continue to support the great work that's happened that led to innovation across the country and frankly around the world.
We did, just to be, since it was hot off the press, I didn't get all the facts, and there was an EDA, I-6 Challenge Grant, that we received,
Right.
you know, so.
EDA is Economic Development Administration.
Yeah, so it was really good. And I want to emphasize, too, the local side. We do have a lot of great local resources. For example, Bene Franklin Council of Governments and HAFIC gave a loan to TRIDEC, gave a loan to Carbitex. They've been very instrumental on a long-term basis in supporting. We do have some great local resources. That's one of them. There's a lot of others.
So there's one for the Congresswoman, but I actually think all three of you should answer this, and that is, my technology just went blank. Is there one trait or effort you've seen as a thread through all of your different experiences that was critical to success?
You know, I actually think that for me, being a good listener has always been critically important in everything I've done, because none of us individually know everything. Sometimes folks think they know everything, but it turns out we can learn a ton when we listen. And it's being able to be critical of your own ideas, take feedback, whether it's as a manager, listening to someone who's working for you, whether it's as a CEO, listening to a board member, or listening to a customer, or as a policymaker, listening to a constituent who wants to say, you know, how policy impacts somebody on the ground and what's working and not working about it. And so I really think for us to continue to be innovative, we need folks to be lifelong learners. What we learned yesterday may not be as applicable today, and things are changing quickly. And go out and seek feedback and advice from other people, and listen to other points of view, because we all become smarter that way, learn things we probably didn't know. And that's one great thing about our jobs, is we get to learn about kind of everything and get involved in all sorts of different issues. It's incredibly interesting and exciting to understand what's happening in areas that you would never have been exposed to if you weren't in this type of role. And that's a huge opportunity for us to use that going forward, and kind of help either new ideas or creative new ideas move forward. So I think we all could be lifelong learners and listen. That's probably a trait that served me well, and so far I'll keep doing it while I can.
My shorter answer is what she said. But let me take it one step further. There is a personal relationship in all of this that has to go along with that being willing to listen. You know, we, especially those of us that are scientists and engineers, think that it's all about the science and the engineering. It's not. It's about the people. And if you can't connect with the folks that you're working with, very little gets done. And so you have to, the first step in that is certainly listening. But I've learned the hard lessons over the time. When it didn't go well, it was usually because I forgot the part about these are people, right? And it's that connection that makes this all really work. That's the way science gets done, frankly, if you want to look at it that way. It's because there is a group of people that trust each other enough to move forward on something that is very difficult and can be very controversial among the teams about what the approaches are. And if you don't have the trust, it doesn't work.
So ditto, listening, people, definitely. And then, the other thing I'd add, I'll speak to it from an entrepreneurial perspective, but also I think just overall career-wise is to truly have a passion for what you want to do. Have it come from the heart. A lot of times entrepreneurs, there's going to be and can be tremendous economic benefit, but I think if you start that in mind, you really need to think about it. If the core of what you're doing is something you really believe in your gut and your heart, is something you can make a difference with, and you're willing to take that risk to do it, that's a great thing. And you'll feel it, you'll know it when it's there and when you're ready to do it.
Great, thank you. Okay, there is a question that's actually received some votes here that they want to hear about, and that's that second one up there. Innovation often outpaces legislation. Drone technology is a recent example. How can the government work with business and labs to enable such innovation?
Well, first, I'd say that's absolutely right. We're behind. The reason I helped start up caucuses like the Internet of Things Caucus and the Reality Caucus which is related to virtual, augmented, and mixed reality, the Digital Trade Caucus, all these things to help educate lawmakers on where technology is heading, so hopefully policy can be more forward-looking than always reactive. We might be a little bit reactive on certain issues, but we don't have to be always if we are looking ahead, listening, seeing where things are going, and adapting to that. That being said, I heard from a lot of innovators too that they want the ability to try out an idea in kind of a safe environment. Maybe there's like a box where there isn't the same regulatory environment where they can try something out, learn what works, and then if it's an idea that really works and has potential, then look at how they might roll that out. Sometimes we have new ideas that don't move forward because they feel like it's constrained before they're even able to test it out. And clearly you've got to think through how that might work, but that's, I think, a common thread in a lot of different areas. But, drones, for example, you have many different issues that come up and come up with technology, issues of safety, issues of privacy. And so you never thought that your neighbor next door, you had a fence, so someone was going to look, and all of a sudden now there's a drone over your yard looking down it and maybe taking a picture of your house. These are areas where people didn't really contemplate that they would become scenarios, and what does that mean, and how do you restrict the movement of that? Those are all areas of policy that now have come into play. And frankly, in many scenarios, industry has tried to play a role too. Understanding these issues are coming, where industry players come together and try to think how would they potentially regulate themselves in these areas so they can move forward and probably provide a framework that they think would work. But there are many new areas. That's one example. I think issues of privacy, customer and consumer safety, on issues of technology are big ones that we're seeing across the board. And I do think in those we should at least move faster than we do on most policy today to adapt and update based on what's happening. And hopefully policy can be a little more nimble than it has been.
Either of our other panelists?
I agree, again, with the point you made. One of the things, we talked about innovation moving forward. Understand that we don't know where a particular innovation is actually going to go. And so one of the things I would not like to see, of course, is the policy get ahead of the innovation, because all we have to do is look at a few examples of technologies, and you realize that some of the first steps weren't necessarily the place we ultimately ended up. We're going through the self-driving automobiles or vehicles. I guess they're not all just automobiles these days, and very concerned, of course, about, yes, there are crashes and that sort of thing, but ultimately that's probably not going to be the biggest issue when we get through it. There are lots of things about privacy and that sort of thing. One of the primary ones that we see today is the blockchain technology that's coming out that looks very beneficial for a whole set of things, but its first implementation was, of course, with Bitcoin, which unfortunately had some difficulties with it. And so you would hate to see the legislation get too far ahead of it. The point you made about it being nimble so that it's just right behind it, though, I think is really critical, because we do have to be careful as we go along. Just keep those things in the right order.
Autonomous driving is a great example, and I just read an article the other day, which I think I read it well. It was kind of happy to see, and it goes back to listening. It was, from what I could tell, the autonomous driving and some of the regulations that they want to put in place, it was very much the government working with industry to listen to each other on both sides, because there's real issues on both sides that want to be shared. And if they can get together and talk about it as it starts to develop and communicate a lot, with the respect and listening on both sides, I think pretty good policy can come out, and it's very important to have those policies for things like autonomous driving and drone technology.
So I'm sorry to say we're out of time. And I know I haven't seen people jumping up, but I think this has been a very interesting conversation. I think it's been a very informative conversation. And maybe if we could just have each of the panelists, maybe in a very 30 seconds to a minute, maybe make any further observations before I close the group today. Ron, why don't we start with you?
I think it's great that we're together. It's just great that you were a catalyst for bringing this kind of group together, to bringing this kind of a conversation to the forefront. And, the things, the base, the foundation that we have as a region with the lab, with our government leadership, trying to really understand what we're doing with the private sector that's kind of primed to take advantage of this foundation to build entrepreneurship. We can all do it together, and that's what today's luncheon was about. So I appreciate it, and hopefully it's a catalyst for doing better things as we go along.
Lee?
I would invite you all to get engaged. We have some ideas about the way things can proceed. We don't have all the best ideas, and it doesn't work if we just sit back in our offices or labs and do things, certainly. So get engaged. There's enough room for everybody.
And I've done a bunch of roundtables on innovation with folks, and I love your feedback, and Dan and I talk about these issues too, so give your feedback to Dan. But the one thing that comes up all the time is that, and everyone brought up the word risk, we are becoming more risk averse, and it's kind of counter to research to think that we aren't going to take risks with ideas, try something new. And turns out sometimes the biggest breakthroughs are when things didn't work, quote unquote. They didn't work out the way you expected. And so I've heard from many researchers saying we're worried that we only want to invest in things that are going to work, or ideas that are proven, or researchers who are proven, which really stifles new researchers who are coming up. So the great thing about innovation and creativity and entrepreneurship is that we're taking a risk, trying new ideas, learning new things, and part of that is risk. And so we've got to remember that when we're looking at policy, et cetera, that that's part of it. That's part of what led to many of the successes we have today. And if we turn away from that, we may not be able to have some of the breakthroughs that we're on the verge of. And I just want to thank you for welcoming me here today. There are just so many really exciting things. I'm a geek at heart, and so I was at PNNL today, and just so many exciting things happening right here. So we expect great things out of the Tri-Cities.
Great. Well, join me in thanking all of our panelists today. It's been a really good discussion, great discussion. Thank you. So before we conclude, again, I just want to thank the Congresswoman for coming, our other panelists for being here. Congressman Newhouse, thank you very much for joining us today. We always like seeing you, so great to have you here. And again, thanks to our sponsor, Bechtel National. Peggy, thank you very much for supporting this event, but supporting TRIDEC. So thank you all. We're close to being on time. Thank you again.